I'll go ahead and read the presenter's bios and the discussant's bio. Dr. Abass Bolaji Isiaka is a leaver on early career fellow in the School of Education and Lifelong Learning at the University of East Anglia. His project, Disabling by Design, Recasting the Future of Higher Education Policies in Africa, develops a social history of disability inclusion policies in West African higher education since 1940. He is interested in the sociology of inequalities in education and disability, policy research and evaluation, international and comparative education, institutional ethnography, and decoloniality. Yann Lebeau is a professor of higher education research at the University of East Anglia. His work addresses the intersections of higher education policy and social change with expertise in internationalization, academic mobility, and global governance. Yann has led major international research and consultancy projects and held senior leadership roles in France, Nigeria, and the UK. His track record demonstrates a commitment to fostering collaborative knowledge exchange and strengthening research ecosystems across diverse contexts. Dr. Edward Boyunga is a doctoral education coordinator at UNICAF University, Zambia. He holds a PhD in development studies from the University of the Free State, South Africa, and Masters in Education from Trinity College, the University of Dublin, Ireland. His work focuses on the political economy of higher education in sub-Saharan Africa, including private higher education, access and equity, curriculum internationalization, academic freedom, and Pan-Africanism. His latest book, published by Routledge, is titled Widening University Access and Participation in the Global South, using the Zambian context to inform other developing nations. We will start with Dr. Abass Bolaji Isiaka. Dr. Abass, you are going to have 30 minutes. When you have 30 minutes, when you have 10 minutes to go, I will raise this to indicate that you have 10 minutes more. And, until your time is up. Two presenters. Okay, I'm so sorry, but we have two presenters today, which means you will share the time equally. You have 15 minutes, Dr. Abass, and then Yann Lebeau will have 15 minutes. I'll remind you when it's 5 minutes to the end of the 15 minutes. I hope that is okay. Over to you, Dr. Abass Isiaka. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much for the introduction. Can you see my screen?
Yes, we can.
I'm trying to share screen. How about now?
Yes.
Can you still see my screen?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, brilliant.
And it's one presentation, by the way, not two.
Yes. But... Yeah, it's just one presentation. So we're going to shift positions as we go along.
Yeah, that's okay.
Okay, and I'll just get us started, if that's okay with you, Yann. Okay.
That's fine.
All right. So good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us. I'm Abass Isiaka at the University of East Anglia, and I'm here with Professor Yann Lebeau, also at the same university. And our presentation today draws on this project we've been doing where we explore the Global Convention on the Recognition of Qualifications Concerning Higher Education and its promise of inclusive, equitable global mobility. So we've traced this convention from its origins or original discussion at the UNESCO's headquarters in Paris, where we followed actors, events, and the negotiations that led to the adoption of this convention, and also its onward implementation since 2019. And our approach in this project is more looking at how different layers of governance are shaping the way stakeholders understand or project the expectations of what this convention should do and could achieve, and how the convention has been received, interpreted, why it was needed, and how the reactions that trailed this convention within the global discourse of higher education. So that is where we are as regard this presentation. So, and I'm going to give an overview of the Global Convention itself, just to give us a bit of background to what we're going to be discussing today. It was adopted in 2019. The convention, which we refer to as the UNESCO Global Convention, is the first legally binding international treaty on higher education. And within its core is this vision from UNESCO that we are describing as a recognition for all, where there is this universal commitment to fair, transparent recognition of higher education qualifications across board, including prior learning and credentials held by refugees and displaced persons. So the convention is intended to strengthen international cooperation, enhance quality assurance mechanisms, and this has been sort of the core debate on, developing and building trust across systems, so we can easily interact or cross-pollinate or fertilize ideas and all that, or even mobility. So quality assurance mechanisms is something that the UNESCO conventions, both the regional and the global conventions, have been trying to entrench within systems, and also to facilitate academic mobility globally, which is an ideal or an idea to advance a more inclusive, equitable education landscape. However, as we've argued in our work, beneath this normative language of inclusion or sustainability, or there is a far more complex political process in bringing the convention to life, which involves negotiation, influencing, lobbying, competing, and also a range of competing meanings and expectations that have been adduced to this convention. And to give you a quick historical background or development of this convention, and just to show that it's not been, I mean, as you can see here, it might look linear on this slide, but it's not a linear process from what we're going to see later in this presentation. And it didn't just emerge in 2019 when it was adopted in Paris. There've been huge antecedent or work around having something that is globally binding, and we've had earlier regimes of regional conventions. We have the first generation and the second generations before then having the global convention in 2019. And this all started in 1970s and extended late into the 20th century. And we have a revisions of the regional conventions before the global convention was adopted in 2019, and entered into force formally in March 2023 when he received the 20th document of ratification. And as of February 2026, we have about 40 state parties to the convention that have ratified it. That's people that have countries that have ratified this convention, and 50% of those ratifications are from Europe, and just about 4 or 7 countries from Africa have also ratified this convention. And you could see where it's sort of the interest for this convention is coming from. So from this timeline, we can see that both UNESCO's long-standing ambition it's been there to globalize higher education governance through standard-setting instruments like this convention. And there's also the political contestations of, okay, do we need to go global with this? Do we stay regional first and then think about the global later? So these are being the debate around, do we need a global convention? And we're also asking this question further, why do we need this global architecture of governance for qualification of our education? So this is sort of is short historical background or timeline of the convention as it is today. And then I'll give you a bit of content to the content of the convention itself, just to take you into the inside of the convention to give you an idea of how it looks and what it does. So the convention contains about 5 sections with some important articles that made headlines. Which, for instance, we have the preamble, which links recognition directly to human rights, especially right to education, right to mobility, and all of those things that are related to the declarations. And it is just a way of intertextually giving the convention some sort of legitimacy within the existing legal framework on rights to a lot of things. And the convention also establishes the principle that recognition must be, through that process, a fair, transparent, timely, and non-discriminatory. And this is where we are getting the idea of a recognition for all agenda, to make sure that everyone with certain qualifications, be it prior learning, remote learning, in different forms, as much as that program is recognized or has some level of recognition, there should be some what you call equivalencies across systems, where we can easily translate credit and all that. So this is what this is one of some of the key elements of this convention. Another section that is really important is section 4, which details the obligations of the state parties to the convention, and this include particularly Article 7, which addresses refugees and displaced persons. And this article allows and encourages, to put it that way, state parties to recognize the qualification of refugees, even when they don't have full documentary proof. So if you don't have a documentation of your qualification as a forced migrant or so on, in a displaced circumstance, your recognition should be allowed. So this is what this article stipulates. And we also have the Article 18, which states that the convention would come into force after 20 ratifications, and these happened in March 2023. So moving forward, I want to just quickly look at what are the problematics for us in this work, and that's what we've been looking at over the past 4 years. And some of the questions that we've been asking is that, while the Global Convention gives UNESCO in particular a chance to align higher education with broader sustainability and inclusion agendas, we are particularly interested in the power relations, in the ruling relations behind the enunciation, the acceptance, and the promotion of this convention. And that's where we started asking, why would actors, so-called dominant actors, or the historically champions of international or internationalization, who are already sort of well positioned in a very highly unequal global education system, agree to a further regulation of global HE. And we also question whether the Global Convention, the power of the Global Convention itself is less in its legal framework, in its legality, but more in the discursive and ideological space it opens for new narratives of global governance of higher education. And lastly, we're also looking at the locus of enunciation, as what Mignolo will call it, which is who owns the UNESCO's Global Convention agenda. So these are the things that we were really interested in. And I'm going to stop here and get Yann to get us going for the next section.
Thank you. Thanks, Abass. So basically, 2019, the world comes together in November on the eve of the COVID pandemic, and adopts a convention to facilitate free movement of students and scholars around the world. We started by asking ourselves the question of why, as Abass suggested earlier. Why is such a convention needed? Why this timing? And we are going to look at this from the perspective of what we refer to here as the polycrisis of the neoliberal globalization. So that polycrisis term is a buzzword at the moment. We're conscious of that, used a lot in policy circles. We hear of the polycrisis of the world. We don't think that the polycrisis we refer to is a polycrisis of the world, but it is definitely a crisis of a concept, the concept of that neoliberal globalization. And refers to a number of interconnected crises that affect today the mechanisms of that neoliberal globalization. Mobility as such was in a process of expansion at the time the convention was approved. What we see on the chart, in particular, the one on the right-hand side on your screen, shows that basically since the early 2000s, mobility of students around the world has been on the rise, and it has risen exponentially, except for the dip that you can locate on the right-hand side of the chart, which refers to obviously the COVID crisis. But otherwise, mobility is on the rise. However, what is interesting to note here is that this mobility is not equally distributed around the world and is not equally affecting all regions around the world. So this mobility that has been seen as the gateway to improved working conditions, to improving individuals' credentials, etc., in the rhetoric that supported it, is not equally distributed around the world. And as the chart on the left is showing you, it's not equally distributed around the world because participation in higher education continues to be very unequal around the world. So unequal participation in higher education, unequal participation in mobility. What's interesting to know here from that chart on the right-hand side is that the current dynamic is showing that the regions that are currently the most dynamic in terms of mobility, both inbound and outbound, are interconnected. So a region like the European region, and we have to be careful here because the regions we refer to here are the UNESCO regions. So Europe is grouped with North America in the big orange space that you see. This is a big space of mobility, both inbound and outbound. So the regions that are the most dynamic in welcoming students from around the world are also the regions that are the most dynamic in terms of sending their students abroad for study. And that's an important dynamic. We see this dynamic developing on a big scale within Asia. Intra-regional mobility is expanding in that region, and some other regions seems to be left behind a little bit in that process, including, as you can see here, for instance, Sub-Saharan Africa or Latin America. And that's quite important in the UNESCO rhetoric about this global convention. Because the global convention, as Abass outlined earlier, is meant to be improving the equity within the mobility process, is meant to be making that mobility more equally recognized around the world. So they picked up on that point about inequalities to push for the agenda of the global convention. So an agenda that had been here since the 1970s, as we said. It's part of the DNA of the UNESCO to promote international cooperation, collaboration, etc., is being revived by circumstances showing that, yes, mobility is on the rise, but that mobility is increasingly a business of the rich. Abass, if you want to move on to the next slide. An interesting, sorry, there's a typo in it's the OECD 25. What we are seeing here is from that report is that international student mobility continues and is probably increasingly influenced by economic factors, with 2/3 of international mobile students originating from high-income countries and actually going to high-income countries. The proportion, the number of countries hosting students from the poorest part of the world is diminishing, and these countries such as, for instance, Canada and France, to illustrate, are countries that have developed for a long time links with low-income countries and continues to draw their international students from these parts of the world. But the tendency is for international mobility to be increasingly a business of upper and middle upper income countries. Thanks, Abass. So from that, we ask a number of questions. Why is global action needed? What is the purpose then of this? The first purpose is, as we've just said, is a corrective purpose. Many countries around the world and organizations are calling for a system of internationalization of higher education that is no longer regulated by sort of neoliberal dynamics, to put it simply. So this corrective that is being called, UNESCO believes that it's in a position to provide it. The second thing that is commonly referred to justify action is the rising national protectionism. This is a situation that is currently primarily affecting some historical champions of international mobility, for instance, the USA, Canada, Australia, the UK as well, where we are ourselves. So these countries are basically closing doors, not necessarily on international student mobility as such, but on immigration, and in the process are affecting global mobility, particularly from the poorest country. And of course, we've got demands from the global south in particular, demanding more decolonized internationalization, more just internationalization, and also more sustainable intra-regional cooperation and mobility. And finally, a factor that UNESCO takes into consideration, and that is attracting more and more interest from academia, is the phenomenon of forced mobility, and what we sometimes refer to as forced internationalization, which is the fact that, contrary to the neoliberal mantra, student mobility is not always a voluntary individual process from people in search of economic benefits, but can be part of a wider forced process. What we're knowing today is that the number of people seeking to access higher education in situations of forced mobility is rising exponentially, and it's actually rising much faster proportionally than the number of students in global mobility. So how did we approach that? Abass, back to you. Oh, you were on screen, Abass. Yes, thanks. Go ahead, Abass. Your mic is, you're muted. No?
I lost the interface just while I was trying to move the screens around.
Okay, you're back on screen. Just share your screen.
How is that now?
Yeah, share. Yeah, that's fine. Go ahead.
Okay, brilliant.
Just summarize the methodology.
Okay, thank you. All right, brilliant. So thank you very much, Yann, for that. And to examine these questions, these provocations that Yann had just put forward within the context of the international student mobilities and all that, we approached UNESCO as a complex and contradictory space, sort of ripe for a critical analysis. And we did conduct network ethnography, which Ball describes as following events and people and policies to understand how things happen in their process. So we followed the global conventions from the point of formation, and then we applied a discursive framework to understand how national and organizational dynamics shape this what we're referring to as the sort of global ideal of how the post-market international education should look like. So our fieldwork, we followed the convention from Paris, where Yann was there. I was also at a couple of intergovernmental conferences. We interviewed representatives from member states such as Zambia, the UK, Turkey, Jordan, and Norway. We also interviewed people at the UNESCO's headquarters in Paris, and also a number of regional coordinators and representatives of national qualification authorities and the national commissions. So we build our work on the notion of Jürgen Habermas's public sphere, where we see the global convention as a space, even though it looks very inclusive in itself, but there is a deeply intertwined power relations ongoing. And we see that there are also pursuance of global, regional, and national agendas within this public sphere, where people can enact a global idea or global project through the process of talking. So this is how we've constructed the UNESCO's convention through Habermas's public sphere. And we also just okay, so in further constructing the global convention as a public sphere, we had to look at we drawn I mean, given how UNESCO was operated through the use of standard setting instruments, such as recommendations and international global conventions and such as conventions and international recommendations, and we see these conventions as both normative and regulative in itself. And we draw on Lackler and Moll's idea of discursive space to look at how this convention structure the interactions or the relationship between member states, state parties, key stakeholders on this convention. And we are able to identify about three functions that this discursive space or this global convention performs. And the first one is the knowledge function, which is the production or the fixation or the circulation of meanings and expectations for our education systems. So through the convention, we can have an idea of how we want, what kind of quality assurance mechanisms we want to pursue, what kind of interactions or meanings or idea we want our systems to look like. And the second function that we see this convention performing is the relational function, which is the representation of the relationships between regions, conventions, and member states. So you see that that relationship also not in itself an equal relationship, but deeply unequal and contested. And we also have the third one, which is the identity function, and which is embedded within the symbolic power that a state party to a convention has, and that which a member state has. So you have, once you ratify a convention, you become a state party to that convention, and you have the power to deliberate on that convention at any intergovernmental conference. But if you're a member state, which means you are not yet a ratifying party to that convention, you've not ratified the convention, which also takes you out of that deliberative cluster into an observing member state. So when you go to when member states go to conferences of this nature to discuss this convention, so you have a section for the state parties and you have a section for the member state who can only observe but cannot necessarily deliberate in the content of the convention. So this is how the discursive space frames the identities of parties or member state participating in this convention. So even though UNESCO presents the convention or even its process as an inclusive and codified participatory space for policy dialogue, in terms of say the debates, the authorship, there are also groups that are able to, I mean, experts now who can dominate debate or discussion on the direction of travel for these conventions. So this discursive arena, we've been able to just play around this idea of discursive space to help us understand the work, the behind the scenes, the messiness of having a global convention that is of this significance. So this is where we've been able to draw on a number of theoretical framework to understand the process of developing and adopting and implementing this convention. Now, just to give you an idea of the making of the convention itself and how member states in different or stakeholders in different rights have understood the coming of or the becoming of this convention. So the Global Convention of 2019 serves as a framework for the recognition of qualifications and mobility and services of people. And it's built on this very complex history of UNESCO of trying to harmonize higher education qualifications. We are seeing it's been failure and successes in the past, which led to the adoption of the first generation and second generation of qualification regimes. And before the Global Convention, we also had the 1963 recommendation on recognition of studies and qualifications in higher education, which was adopted at the UNESCO's 27th General Conference. And this particular recommendation served as the sort of the placeholder or an interim non-binding international framework for addressing interregional issues. So this was sort of this is a recommendation, it's non-binding, you don't have to ratify it, but it has been the foremost debate or attempt at globalizing qualification recognition. And since then, we've seen parallel revisions and adoptions of second generations. You can talk of the Addis, the Tokyo, the Arab State, and the Buenos Aires of recent. And we also have, so what we're interested in here is to look at how this parallelism of the regional convention on one hand and the global convention on the other, and how this sort of creates a major tension, even though UNESCO says, oh, regional conventions and the global convention are complementary, but member states are asking, as you can see on the screen here, why do we need to ratify two conventions that look really similar? And this sort of created confusion with some countries preferring to go global directly without ratifying the regional convention, and others thinking, okay, we try to keep the regional framework because we believe it has more benefit to our system than the global convention. So these are the sort of the politically complex terrain within which the two the regional and the global convention have evolved over time. And I'm going to hand over to Yann for the next session.
Thank you, Abass. So as Abass has just shown, this is a complex process, and it's a complex process because that convention is the result of it's the work of a membership of organization, and therefore it has to reflect the interest and sometimes the contradictory interest of a range of stakeholders. We're just illustrating here with a few quotes extracted from the interviews we conducted, some of these potentially contradicting interests or complex interests of various organizations, starting with the UNESCO head office, the higher education section, the secretariat of the convention. These internal organizations of UNESCO have their own agenda for it. One of them, of course, is the idea of globalizing conventions, which is a difficult process for international organizations. And the second one is to establish some sort of connection, some sort of narrative between the regional convention, which were in the process of being adopted in their newest versions when the Global Convention came about. So the Global Convention project came about at a time when regional conventions were yet to be ratified in many parts of the world. They were in some parts, but not everywhere. So the UNESCO their main interest was to build that continuity in the narrative from the regional to the global, for a global space of regulated circulation of students. Moving on, Abass, another obviously set of important stakeholders to us. Abass, can you move on the slide? Thank you. Are the member states themselves, the countries. Each country came to this process with various interests. Illustrating this with the United Kingdom, we can see here that, of course, the UK being one of the main point of attraction, one of the main poles of attraction of international student mobility, came to this process with the idea that the more we open up the process, the more likely we are going to benefit from it. We're benefiting from it because our degrees are being recognized around the world, but many students still find difficulties sometimes reintegrating their labor market when they return home. So the more openness, the more transparency, the more benefits to us as a key player in the field. That was the perspective from the United Kingdom, but also wanting to show that they were supporting the humanitarian dimension of that process, and in particular the Article 7 on the mobility of refugees and forcibly displaced people. From other parts of the world, for instance, Zambia, from the interviews we had with Zambian officials, there was a clear process for Zambia of being part of an international process. Zambia was one of the countries that immediately volunteered to pilot the UNESCO qualification passport that was developed alongside the convention, and therefore had a clear agenda of participating in that international process, which provides a lot of visibility through the UNESCO, as well as a little bit of funding, limited in the case of UNESCO, we know that. Turkey, another key stakeholder, seeing today as one of the major destination of international students. It's one of the countries that is witnessing the fastest rise of international inbound mobility. Had always an agenda of being associated with particularly the European higher education space. And therefore, they had already signed the convention, the Lisbon Convention. Thank you for the reminder. And were seeing themselves as being a key player in the field that did not really necessarily need to have another global convention. So although they welcomed the convention initially, they have yet to ratify it at the point of our research because they didn't necessarily feel the need of being part of a global thing, when what they wanted to be seen was basically part of the European higher education space where most international students are currently attracted. So various contradicting interests from national bodies here that the UNESCO had to basically embed into the development of that convention. And we are not going to touch on, if you want to move on, Abass, we are not going to touch on the other stakeholders that were participating because we don't have time here, but there were loads of international organizations, etc., that are also involved in setting up the agenda of that global convention. So coming back to the issue of the discursive space, the challenge for UNESCO was to integrate all these dimensions and was to manage basically expectations with its very, very limited resources. Moving on, Abass. Thank you. Because of course, when limited resources are available, lobbying influences can express themselves, and this is the challenge of the discursive space as the UNESCO conceives or develops it. It is prone to influences, and over the past 10, 15 years, the 10 or 15 years that it's taken the convention to develop into what it is now, there have been unequal progress of the convention development. For some periods, meetings were not being held because funding was not available. Then meetings were being held because some countries were making voluntary contributions, allowing the agenda to carry on. So, of course, these countries and regions that have been the most dynamic in influencing the move towards the global conventions were the ones that were already far ahead of others in terms of being embedded into regional structures, such as, for instance, countries of Europe under the Lisbon Convention. And this process of influence, of lobbying, in some cases, is continuing today to influence the implementation phase of the convention, and explains why we are seeing this very unequal level of ratification of the convention worldwide. Over to you, Abass. For the concluding chapter.
Thank you. Yeah. Okay, just to summarize.
1 minute, please, Abass. 1 minute.
Okay,
Yes,
brilliant. So what we concluding on is that we see, when we look at the content of the Lisbon Recognition Convention and the Global Convention, we see a similar structure and the same idea, and we argue that is from the way the European member states have pursued this agenda, we can see the idea of Lisbon going global, and that's why we're discussing this, the idea of the global higher education area. And as well, we see this new standard that UNESCO is trying to set, failing to acknowledge or recognize the existing inequalities in their plans for the post-market international HE. And also within this very complex process of ratification negotiation, there is a range of engagement and non-engagement from member states across board. And also, importantly, is the idea of recognizing the qualifications of refugees and displaced migrants, and bringing us to our next line of research, which is looking at the concept of forced internationalization, and how countries or member states are responding to this phenomenon. So I'm going to stop there for the discussion. More from us on this convention. We have a blog by Base, and also the paper on the opinion this research is also published with Policy Reviews in Higher Education. Thank you.
Yes, thank you so much, Dr. Abass and Lebeau, for that very insightful presentation. And now we'll move to the discussion. Dr. Edward, are you there? Dr. Edward?
Oh.
Dr. Edward, please go ahead.
Oh, thank you very much. Thank you very much, Abass and Yann, for the opportunity to engage with your paper. I did enjoy reading the paper. To start with, I must point out that your paper, it offers great insights into the behind scene politics that influences global higher education governance. As you are presenting, a few things caught my attention. One is the choice of your conceptual framing, the notion of discursive space. I think I would say for me that was really a good choice, as it allows us as readers, as followers, as you are presenting, to kind of evaluate how power, discourse, and policy making interacts, as well as shapes global higher education. And through that, we are able to see how the UNESCO's Global Convention then serves as a public sphere for policy deliberations and influences. At the same time, it also allows us, as you rightly demonstrated, to to show the tensions, within this sphere. We see that policy in itself is not neutral. No, there are always tensions regarding to that. For instance, as you are presenting, it is clear that some of the member states, particularly the wealthier countries like the UK, Norway, we see their influence in terms of how they're able to shape global policy, by, of course, resource contribution, by strategic appointments within UNESCO. As I was reading this convention, I realized that one of the key strategic expertise who was leading this was from Norway. And also from your research, you highlighted the influence of the UK government in bringing out some of issues to do with gender, to do with refugees. And so we're able to see in particular how wealthy countries are able to influence global countries. So as I was reading, I also recalled the words of a certain Professor Russell Botman, who was at one time a former rector at Stellenbosch. In his foreword in a book called Higher Education for the Public Good, he stated that higher education is not neutral, it is highly political. And indeed, your research has demonstrated clearly that higher education is not neutral, it is political, whether the policies are being advanced by a nation, by an international organization like UNESCO, there is always some aspect of politics which are behind that. And in this case, we're able to see that the internationalization of higher education agenda, it carries with it intricate political and economic implications. For countries like UK, I believe these are fueled by market competition, but at the same time with power dynamics. And in so doing, I think we see the imposition of Western ideologies within the global higher education discourses in terms of quality assurance, in terms of curriculum, as many countries now will try to align their curriculums as well as qualifications to universities or countries in the global south, so that their qualifications are recognized. Yeah, even as you are presenting, there's something which struck me, like in as much as we see the influence of the global north in this agenda, the ratification, I think it's something else. As I was checking the 40 countries which have ratified, I realized that there are a number of countries which receive a lot of international students, such as the USA, Canada, China, Russia, Germany, among others, as well as Turkey, who have not ratified the convention. So I was then asking myself, what then is the implication of this? Is this just a mere academic discourse, or are we going to materialize it? No, because these are some of the countries which have a lot of international students, other than, of course, the UK, France, and Japan, Australia, and a few others who have ratified that. And what then is the implication of that? Even at the regional level in Africa, Southern Africa, where I am located, I realize it's only Zambia and South Africa which have ratified this convention. Most of them, I think, they haven't even ratified the Addis Ababa Convention to start with. For South American countries, even there, I think the ratification level for the regional convention is not even up to like 80%. So I'm now asking myself then, what was the rush to bring on board this big convention before we even kind of come to an agreement with regards to the regional convention within our regions, which influences internationalization of higher education in different contexts. Then as you were presenting, there's also another thing which caught my eyes, and that is the choice of your methodology, a network ethnography. I think I haven't engaged very much with this, but then it was, of course, a good choice in the sense that it allows us the opportunity to have a glimpse of the behind the scene politics. It allowed you to interact with the people who are directly involved in this policy. But then as I was now reading more about it, I was thinking of myself as an early career researcher based at an institution in the Global South. From what I saw, I think this is kind of an expensive undertaking, which allows one to, like you said, to follow the events as they are taking place, to go to these conferences, conventions, to apply for visa, to attend these events. So I was asking myself, what if I'm to use this as an early career researcher, what are the implications? What are the challenges do I face, for me as a researcher, an early career researcher in a Global South institution? Is it elitist in some way, or is it inclusive? So that was it about the methodology. And then just a few questions, of course. The other one is based on your interaction with key stakeholders involved in drafting the convention. How would you explain the inertia by most countries in ratifying this convention? Then the other thing, of course, is it would have been more nice, I think, for you to go in details to discuss the notion of how the inclusive processes play in discursive spaces in discursive spaces which are unequal and are quite political. Like, what then is the implication of this for other countries more in the Global South, which are more like on the receiving end in terms of this convention? Yes, they are invited to the party, but I think they are invited not as equal powers, so to say, but they're just like invited just for the sake of tokenism and for this agenda to appear inclusive. But meanwhile, we see it's an extension of the Lisbon Convention, the Bologna Process Convention. Then what are the implications of that regarding like decolonization of internationalization of higher education? Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Dr. Abass, Dr. Yann Lebeau, would you like to respond?
Yeah, we can. In the interest of time, I was wondering whether perhaps we could pick up one or two questions that, along with the points that Edward has made, just to make sure that if anybody's got burning question, we cover them, because we don't have much time. But otherwise, happy to answer those questions now.
Okay. I think that is a very good suggestion. We'll take questions online first. If you have a question and you're online, please indicate by raising your hand. In the absence of questions online, we'll cross into the house. Is there anyone with a question? Okay, Julius, please go ahead.
Thank you very much, and thank you very much to the two presenters. My question is riding on the fact that in your presentation, you have recognized that major countries that in the past have been hosting migrants have been closing their doors. But this is also in an event that they are becoming more inclined to accepting certain higher education qualifications to others. So for instance, some countries are getting more inclined to accept postgraduate qualifications for people to do maybe master's degrees and PhD qualifications. But then, how is this convention functioning in this arena where countries are becoming are preferring certain qualifications to others? So that is my question, really.
Any other question? So you can take all the questions together. In-house? Anyone? Okay, Professor Melanie, please go ahead.
Thanks very much, Tolu. I just wanted to add to what Julius has said about how all of this also aligns with national visa regimes. So you've got this drive to international mobility, and then you've got very specific national visa regimes, which might not very easily speak to each other. And these are not just operating in the global north. I mean, we have huge battles in South Africa for people coming from other African countries in terms of getting visas. So I'd be interested in your comment on those two systems, which really seem to pull in very different directions. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Walker. Yann or Dr. Isiaka, who is responding?
I'm happy, Abass, to make just a start on this last point about basically the power of the convention as a standard setting instrument. I think obviously the UNESCO has no power to dictate anything to any country in matters of higher education. A standard setting instrument such as this global convention, the first ever global convention in higher education, is setting some intentions, best practice, etc., in matters of qualification recognition and strictly on qualification recognition. And therefore, the convention doesn't have the power of imposing on countries particular models of recognition. I think it's an important because although we've spoken of influences within that space, and that is why we felt the discursive space is so important to understand the process. Yes, there are influences, and yes, the Lisbon Convention, the European Convention for Recognition of Qualification, the only convention so far to have been ratified by all member states in its region. Yes, this one has been the model used for the Global Convention, and therefore there is that temptation to see it as an imposition by Western countries or European countries, in this case, of a model on the rest of the world. However, there is no imposition here. And as Edward was saying earlier on, in fact, if we look at the context of Southern Africa, very few countries have ratified it. Very few countries have so far ratified the Addis Ababa Convention, the African Convention. So as such, as a standard setting instrument, it has very limited power. And it probably will continue to have very limited power because it is very unlikely that we one day see this convention being ratified by all countries. The stakes are elsewhere. The stakes, we think, are in monopolizing debates, language about the globalization, the internationalization of higher education, and the direction of travel in terms of mobility. This is where we think the stakes are. The fact that in 2019, some countries, the three first countries that expressed themselves on that project of the convention when it was adopted in November 2019, in that very meeting we attended, the first three countries to speak were Venezuela, Yemen, and the state of Palestine. I mean, how many international fora today would allow these three countries to take center stage and post big statements on what the importance of global mobility and the importance of mobility for themselves. It is a forum, it is a space where countries are also able to express. So I think we shouldn't read too much in the power of the convention as an instrument setting, because it's built on other forms of domination that have expressed themselves very well, particularly Western domination of mechanisms of quality assurance, etc., that have expressed themselves very well before that convention was adopted. So that was the point I wanted to raise. And so its connection to other trends, such as, for instance, the immigration regimes and of countries, etc. And the UNESCO is now having a discourse on these restrictions and is calling for countries to disentangle mobility regulations from immigration laws, for instance, and that came out recently in debates within the UNESCO. But the convention itself never really engaged with that process directly, I think. Abass, if you want to conclude on that point.
Yes, I think we're constantly seeing this increasing nexus between mobility and higher education, and it's conflating how member states, how countries are, developing policies to address this. So, so if you are seeking to pursue higher education or international higher education somewhere, then you are bound by, even universities, for instance, in the UK, will tell you they don't really have any say on what the UK VI or the UK visa authority says. So what the government says regarding mobility or migration is fine. Even though universities want to attract more international students, there's a national strategy to attract more international students. Then you also have a contrasting political positioning within how migration is being pursued, or the debate around de-internationalization that we're seeing in some countries. So this is I think this is really important. I think the question I want to address is the implication of the discursive space, the way the process of this convention becoming, and how who has had their say, who has been able to lead on different kind of agendas. Say, for instance, the TNEs that we're now seeing now, the transnational education that's now becoming the next good thing after. So we see that the foremost players of this idea of transnational education are also countries from the global north, and they already positioning, having their swords in different countries, making sure that they have bilateral or multilateral agreement with these countries to make sure that they can easily enter countries, go to different places to establish, allow their universities to establish different centers and all that. So you can see that the spoils or the benefit of this convention is largely, it's sort of making the market ready for countries or universities in the global north. So yes, the implication is really huge, given who dictates the terms of conversation, and that shapes where we go and all that. And so, as Yann has mentioned, the convention itself is not, it's just probably stamping what's already on ground. We've had this unequal sort of foundation, even though the convention seeks to prepare level playing field for member states to be able to participate and develop their own identity as a key player. But it's not. There's much more geopolitical power relations that are already embedded within all of this before the global convention. So yes, it's really important. Even though the process looks inclusive, there's going to be a huge power relations or ruling relations going on as we work into the implementation of the convention. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Dr. Isiaka, and Monsieur Lebeau, thank you so much for being here today. We don't have any more time for any more questions, so we'll call it a day. To our online participants, thank you so much. Thank you, Dr. Mboyonga. I did not forget you. Thank you so much for being here. All right, so it's
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you.
Bye-bye. Thank you,
very
everyone.
much.
Thank you.
Thank you for the invitation.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks very
Bye.
much. Bye.
Bye.